Anyway, you don't follow that hard copy because that keeps changing. Only LMS you have to follow. Anything is there, you will not take one more track. You want hot water? You have a sipper? Just give it to me. I'll get it.
Good morning. Good morning. Shall we get started? Yes. Yeah. Okay. Why is everybody sitting so far away? Everybody is. All of you are reliving your college days, actually. Okay. Good to have you here. I don't know how many of you know who I am. My name is Rajneesh. Currently the co-founder, promoter of a company called Venture Bean Consulting. We are engaged in the business of business consulting. In addition to business consulting, we also do a lot of work in leadership development, and we also help our clients to raise capital. That's what I do. I can use that word. That's what I do most of my time. I got in YPL to the last. Now, the second year running, I completed 2 years in IPL. In IPL, I teach only finance. So I don't teach finance anywhere else. I only teach this here. And I'm not an academician in that. In the true sense, what I teach in finance is, of course, there's a lot of theory, so don't get scared that it has no connect to what theoretical finance is all about. But I try and make theory as close to and as connected to business as possible. Because otherwise, I don't think it makes any sense to know any of you, because you're not here to get and become a finance professional. So I'll try and keep this as interesting as possible. How many of you have, before I got into Venture Bean, I have spent close to 18 years with 2 large banks. The first 12 years was with ICICI Bank, and the second 6 years was with Kotak Mahindra Bank. So that's what I've done in my corporate life. And I stopped doing finance quite early in my life. So the last 10 years of my corporate life, I did only sales. So I have very corporate experience. I'll try and bring all of this as a part of finance course to you, because all of you could be from different functions. And I think one of the important question that everybody's mind keeps going around, especially in people who are in mid-level in corporate, is how does it all really make sense to me? I am never going to get into the finance department of my company, so why do I need to know all of this? So to answer this question very simply, and if you look at leadership assessment across large number of companies, most companies have started to, and the research shows very clearly that there are a set of people who are tagged stars, whether you do it formally or you don't do formally in organization. There are some people who are considered stars, and there are some people who are considered non-stars. And the difference between stars and non-stars in terms of performance is not marginal. It is now by research proven that they are more than 30-40% in terms of performance between stars and non-stars. And that's why many companies believe that they must have large number of stars in their organization. So what do stars do differently as compared to non-stars? And this question that all of you must really figure out. What is the difference between stars and non-stars? So there are a set of competencies only non-stars display, stars don't display. And there are a set of competencies both stars and non-stars display. And there are a set of competencies which are displayed only by stars and are not displayed by non-stars. And fortunately or unfortunately, financial acumen is one of those competencies. Yeah, that's one way to look at it, and I say that's from perspective of whether the glass is half full or half empty, but at least now we know how to get into stars. So one of the competencies that definitely stars display is high level of financial acumen. Because whether we like it or not, as we get up, go senior in an organization, and as we aspire to climb up the corporate ladder, you will get into positions where you understand how the business is doing. And this question you can't answer unless you understand how the business is also doing financially. It is not enough to understand and say the business is doing alright because we are acquiring customers at XYZ%. We can't only say the business is doing alright or not doing alright because we lost certain number of customers. We can't say business is doing alright or not doing alright because we discovered or invented a new technology, or we adopted or moved to a new technology. It's not enough. You also need to convert all of this into saying, okay, how is the business doing today financially, and how is the business expected to do in the coming years and in the coming time. And this conversation is quite easy to do if you understand finance. And it's quite scary to do if you don't understand finance. And so financial acumen is important as a part of competencies of stars. And there are of course many other competencies. This is just one of them. And I'm sure even if you don't have this, you may have many others. So this course is structured into 8, or this particular term is structured into 8 sessions. And just to give you a brief idea of what we are going to do in those 8 sessions. Today, the 2 sessions that we have today, I will introduce finance to you as simply as possible and look at some interesting application to finance to real life. And we will do one detailed session on understanding accounting. Because if you don't understand accounting, finance is quite hard. Because you wouldn't understand what any of these things mean. And you wouldn't understand how these things come about in a balance sheet and a profit and loss account. So we need to understand accounting quite well. And for us to do that, after the class of today, we will do in the next classes few exercises on how to create balance sheet and profit and loss account. If we have been given some transactions and how do we. So you will get familiar and you will get able to build the profit and loss account and balance sheet. So the time you finish accounting course, if somebody says, okay, these are the transactions, show me a balance sheet and profit and loss account, you will have enough ability to do it. Companies, because you definitely won't be required to create balance sheet and profit and loss account, but having understood how to create profit and loss account and balance sheet, we can move ahead to say, okay, I have the financial statements of a company, can I analyze how the company is doing? That's what this financial analysis is all about. An important part of your job already could be or will become very soon is to make and approve and decide whether you should make large investments behind a particular product, behind a particular geography, behind a particular department. So if you have this requirement of saying, should I commit so much of money behind one particular project? How do we evaluate those projects? And those projects could be in the form of new product, could be in the form of creating a new team, could be in the form of getting into new geographies. They all require capital investments. So how do you evaluate capital investment? And what that is all about capital budgeting. And a very important part of your life will become costing, which is very internal. So there are two types of accounting, what we call as financial accounting, which is what gets presented to outside world. And the other part is called management accounting, which is what internal documents which are created for running businesses more effectively. And an important part of management accounting is costing. So in costing, we will look at many managerial decisions which you cannot take unless you understand costing. For example, should we discontinue a particular product? Should we exit a particular geography? Should we take a particular order based on a particular price that is being offered? Such decisions can be taken if you know and understand costing. So this is what we will do in term 1. Term 2 will primarily revolve around. So if you look at it very carefully, till here we are looking at financial data and information which has already happened. So all of this is focused largely on past information. But that is not enough for us to run businesses. And based on past information, we must have capability to project the future performance of the company. And that is what we will primarily focus in term 2. So term 2 will primarily focus on building financial models and plans. Okay. And term 4, which is, so term 2 also has 8 sessions. And term 4 has 4 sessions. And in term 4, we will focus more on looking at more detailed parts of finance, which is called entrepreneurial finance, which will more be in the realm of how do we value companies, how do we make a company appropriate for a VC or an investor to look at, what do they really look at when they invest in certain of these startups and early stage companies. So that's what primarily we will do in term 4, which has 4 sessions. So this is broadly the structure of our finance class. So those who are overwhelmed with the standard of finance, don't need. Finance is nothing but not a nomenclature. So that when I say a particular word, you must understand what it means. It is true for our domain. That we need to have some nomenclature, and we must understand what that nomenclature means. Having understood this, math is nothing but common sense and math. And which I'm sure all of you have in math abundance. So it should not be a problem. So just to get a feel of in terms of the demographics of the class, how many of you are engineers here? Okay, how many non-engineers? Okay, so non-engineers is in what field? Rohit, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I've done computers, graduation in computer science.
Okay, so science. Okay.
Science.
Okay, science. Okay.
Master's computer science.
Okay, all science. So all of our science we have in some form or other. Okay. How many of you have been exposed to finance before? Okay. In what capacity?
Very less.
Very less. But in what capacity?
PGD, just the introduction, accounting, balance sheets.
Okay, so you have some idea of what I'm talking about. Okay.
Analyzing.
Analyzing results. Okay.
I did a course in finance 6 years ago, but companies.
Okay, so you have a deeper understanding of finance. Okay?
Profitability of project.
Profitability of knowledge. Anybody else?
I just did accounting for QS1 plus 2 course.
Okay. Okay, so many of you have some idea of what I'm talking about. Okay, good. Others don't worry. By the time we finish, all of you will be masters in finance. One of the clear deliverables for me in terms of teaching finance after the course is over, nobody should have fear of finance. And you should have enough confidence to engage with the CFO of the company and say, okay, I don't agree with what you are saying. And you would say, why not? And if you're telling two things that you want to know. And if you achieve that, then you have got finance right appropriately. Okay, so what is finance? And why do we, other than my skill of perhaps being a strategic competency that you must know, why do you want to know finance? Any other reason for us to learn about finance?
It's effective planning.
Everything is finance driven. In what way?
At the end, money matters.
All the decision made. So profitability is an important driver for an organization's existence. Right? And so we obviously should know that managers all our decisions affect profitability. Okay. Anybody else?
That's what. At the end, money is which is driving the business. So if it is not making money, the business is not there.
What do you explain with that?
The market it has a lot of potential within itself.
So we should pursue profit or we should be pursue value?
Value, not in terms of finance only. not
Profit
in-
follows value.
Yeah.
Profit follows value. Okay? So why are organizations in business? Organizations are in business for creating value or organizations are in business for making money?
Making
And making money at the end, but
Okay?
Good value.
It used to be making money, but seems to have changed over the last few years, where creation of value and entering spaces which have hitherto been uncharted seems to be quite important. Like, all the funding that the e-commerce business is getting right now seems to be based on the value they're offering rather than the short-term profitability.
It's because of the competition, but everybody is concentrated on the fake numbers. That's the budgeting system. But due to competition, they try to bring a much value.
So how do you explain the geo into mobile? Where is value? They're destroying value in the entire telecom industry.
They started as a pioneer first, then the next Airtel will come like that. We can't know, right? We can't say anything. Then he has to need more value-added
It's
services.
still a value in the bottom of the pyramid, right? In terms of the disruption that it brings in.
Yeah, but the Reliance DNA is really profitability, so you really get worried when Reliance does something like you. I mean, where is the profitability in this business if you operate this way?
Something I would want to
But they
understand.
also try to attack the volumes.
So, all of you are right. And some of these are the challenges that all of you will face as you get senior in organization and occupy those positions where you will be required to make such decisions. And unfortunately, leadership and companies' decisions are not based on one metric. You really have to take into consideration many things before you decide whether I pursue the top line growth as my primary objective or I pursue bottom line growth as my primary objective, or there is a way to pursue both. What is short term objective and what is long term value that I am creating? And these are very, very nebulous, I would say, objectives that people use to justify their managerial decisions. But behind all of this, you must know whether you are going to lose money or make money over a long period of time. because you can afford only so much. So it's okay to make decisions which are contrary to expectation, but behind it, you must have ability to understand how much capital you need to support your managerial decision. This is what finance enables you to do. It does not tell you what to do. Don't use finance as the sole decision making tool. It is not. But finance can enhance your decisions. Finance can point you out in certain directions that you must look at also. And finance can help you take certain decisions because you can afford certain losses. And you will want to get into a loss business because you know you can afford it. And the value or the expectations of supposedly lost business over a long period of time would be quite valuable. And all of this you can know and you can figure out only if you understand finance quite well. Right? But all of you are right. So don't feel that there is only one way to decide how to run a business. There are many ways. And all of them are correct because all of them exist in the market. Okay, important. So this is slightly dated. December 2015, this data got published. And unfortunately, worldwide and in India, finance literacy is quite low. Right, and the numbers are quite scary. And if you look at those numbers, only 24 Indian adults are financially literate. Which clearly means that there is a lot of effort that we need to put in to get ourselves financially literate. Not only for the organization requirement, but also for your personal well-being. Because if you're financially illiterate, you could probably be making the wrong decisions as far as your personal financial plan is concerned. And I think as Indians, we pay very little attention to it. We assume that somehow it will all fall in place by the time I retire. And we don't actively manage our personal finance. Again, I think it originates from this whole idea of saying, I don't really understand what all this is all about. And so as we get financially literate, we must use it not only to run businesses, but also use it to make right personal financial decisions. So ultimately you have only certain, as in business all of us have certain limited capital and we must put it to right use. So what is finance? Very simply, finance is the process by which finance is the study about how we acquire money and how do we manage it. Very simply, that's how it is. So you must know where you are making money, on how to make money, and you must know how to manage it well. And this is applicable to individuals, government, corporates, all of them need to know how to do this. And so finance is, as I said, is broadly divided in three categories: personal finance, corporate finance, and government finance. For this course, we will primarily restrict ourselves to corporate finance. However, I understand that personal finance could seem to be quite interesting, and so if you have some specific questions, please ask. I don't have a problem trying to give you some ideas and some insights. But try and restrict our discussions to corporate finance as much as possible. But corporate finance and personal finance do cross each other for a simple reason that many of personal finance decisions could result in becoming shareholders of organizations. And so there is an overlap between personal finance and corporate you start owning business. We will not do anything about public finance. Very little in term 2, but largely we will avoid public finance, which is largely in the realm of government finance. And what is financial management? So by doing this, you must have a process which is efficient as well as effective. Because you don't do this well, you can't say that you are doing this process and managing this process well. So the whole process must be extremely efficient and effective, and if you can do this, it's said to be a process of financial management. So if you understand these two things, we are quite okay to understand what we are going to talk about. So we are going to talk about how to make money and how to manage this process of making money and growing money and investing money in a more efficient and effective manner. And a more efficient and effective manner also falls in the realm of our decision in terms of what do we do with this money. Are we putting this money to the right use? Because that is the process of managing money. Any questions at any time, please ask. Right? Don't wait for clarifications. If you need any clarifications, stop me and ask. It doesn't really matter what that question is, whether it is relevant to the slide here or irrelevant, as long as there is something on the slide or there is something which I am saying originates some questions in your doubt in your mind, please ask, because that to me is the best way to learn, because then I can address some specific requirements you may have, which others may also have, and I wouldn't know that it really is something that you would want to know. Right? So please ask and stop me, there is no problem at all. So why do we study finance? Finance is all about studying value. We create value in many ways, and we must know how we are creating value or how we are destroying value. So finance is all about ability to study and understand value. There are two concepts in finance that we must absolutely understand, and we will visit it again and again in many different ways. The first concept is about time. And very simply put, if you have 100 rupees with you today, and the option with you is, you can give this 100 rupees to me today, or you can give this 100 rupees to me 1 year later. Is the value of 100 rupees to me the same? No. Why?
This year you may be paying something else for 100 rupees. You may not be able to buy the same property.
Maybe I'll be able to buy more.
Inflation.
If you gave me 100 rupees last year, I could have bought lower data than what I can buy today. So the value of 100 rupees is more if I use it in terms of consumption. Could be. So what is the time value of money? So we don't look at money in terms of its ability to get consumed. We look at money in its ability to
Get value. More value.
we get value by doing what?
Investing.
By investing. So whenever we think of invest money, we also must attach the concept of opportunity return with money. So if you give me 100 rupees today, or if you give me 100 rupees 1 year later, to me they don't have the same value. Why? Because for 1 year, I probably have an investment option which I can use to deploy this money. So for example, if today the interest rates in the market for no risk investment is 10%. And if you gave this money today to me, and I invested this money in this no risk option at 10%, what will be the value of 100 rupees to me at the end of 1 year? 110. So unless you give me 110 next year, I would prefer to take 100 rupees now. Is it clear? So money has this concept of time. So with money we always associate the value of time, and money creates a value because we have an investment option. Opportunity. There is an opportunity to earn more on this money depending upon how we invest it. Right? Similarly, if I continue to invest it for 1 more year, at the end of the second year, what is the value of this 100 rupees? 121. Because I invested 110 rupees again for 1 year at 10%. And this is the whole concept of time value of money. Money always has value with time. And what would happen if money did not have value with time? What would happen? Suppose value of the 100 rupees did not become 110 rupees or did not have the opportunity to become 110 rupees 1 year later. What would you do?
No growth, but inflation.
What would you do?
Wouldn't invest in
Would not invest.
What would you do if you don't invest?
Keep it in bank. Or in
But why would you keep it in mind?
or house.
spend it.
I would spend it, yeah.
You will spend it. If there is no time value attached with money, people would consume the money. They wouldn't save. So this whole incentive to save originates from the value that the money has, and higher the value, more is the incentive to save. And in this context, if you look at India as an economy and you look at US as an economy, and all of us wonder why that economy is debt driven and why we are not so debt driven. It's simply because in that economy the value of money with time is very less. What do you think is the interest rate in US economy at this point of time? What is the value of time in Japan? Negative. You better spend it before you get it. Because if you keep it, 100 will become 99 1 year later. There is no incentive to save. There is also incentives are created to consume. And as you get to zero and as you get to negative, people will borrow to spend. And it makes sense as far as behavior is concerned, right? Why wouldn't I borrow? Because I have to pay less. So, whether we will become like this, of course we will become like this. If our interest rates fall, there is less and less incentive to save, or what else can happen?
I think this explains why Japan offers.
What's that?
I think this explains why Japan offers loans at very negligible cost for US, most of our Indian.
Yeah, it partly explains why Japanese loan rates are quite attractive. But what else? So if there is no incentive to save, what else would happen? One is consumption. What else?
Inflation goes.
How does inflation go up if you have no time value of money?
Because most of the people will, because there is no incentive to save, people also people will be interested in spending on money. They are only obviously
The demand will
demand will go.
override the supply.
So maybe the demand for certain goods will override the supply because more and more people want to spend. So there is a possibility that inflation will go up if you make too much of money available by reducing the incentive to save. What else? So put yourself in that shoe. Interest rate in India is 0. You're still earning the same amount of money every month.
Investments in other products will go.
You will start investing in riskier products.
Alternatives.
You will move your money from less risky product to more risky product. And that is why if you look at again like US, etc., people think that they are saving, but most of their supposedly saving is all in equity markets.
It's good for a growing country like us, like developing country. We get all foreign. They have 1%, they come here, they can invest, they can make better money.
Yeah, so there are good and there is bad about high interest rates. So unfortunately there is nothing which is one-sided. So there are some areas where high interest rates are good and beneficial, but there are many areas in which high interest rates are detrimental. So what are the detrimental areas if you continue to keep interest rates at 8, 9, 10%?
You'll be taking money for something else, like business development or
So what happens if the interest rates don't come down in India? Continue to be 10%. Why? But India, suppose, has 10% deposit rates.
Everybody would like a deposit rate, so we
Everybody will put more money in deposit.
people would invest
So what are the detriment? What are the negative aspects of this behavior?
So the
Cash
same
flow will be
much
less.
cash flow.
Money of flow will be less.
No
There won't be much cash flow. Why?
There won't be any transactions in selling, buying out anything.
Banks will
It's
just
only
sit
the
on cash.
deposit.
Banks will.
Just simply sit on the cash.
Okay.
the reverse applies.
Who? How does bank earn interest on it?
They let money, they expect for investment. So, they will not be able to pay the interest
You have deposited 100 rupees in the bank, you are earning 10%.
So,
Instead of earning 2%, you are earning 10%.
Similar industry.
So the
Why it would not grow?
Because I would rather put the money in bank rather than buying it.
Industry growth will be less.
Okay, so banks won't be able to deploy this money effectively. Okay?
Industry will not be able.
One at a time.
Industry will not be interested to borrow money.
Okay, good.
the same reverse supply becomes more than demand, so they have to sell at low profitability. Obviously, the margins and
Who
everything.
has to sell low profit?
The industry,
Which industry?
any industry for that matter, where there is no buying capacity or rather they don't want to buy.
Okay.
This behavioral pattern changes.
Okay.
You will buy less, exhale more, buy less, and production also will get higher buying income of.
Okay.
same point, production will come down. Infrastructure funds will be this.
So what do you think banks do with this money in their life?
They
Redeploy.
They finance businesses, they
How they lend.
which is lend to businesses,
Yeah.
Personal lending also.
lend to personal lending. So the money is not sitting in the bank.
Cost management system.
So
All economies have two kinds of people. People who are surplus at this point of time and people who are in deficit. And banks and other institutions like mutual funds who are large players in this, what is called intermediaries in financial system, connect people who are surplus in money with people who are deficit in money. And in this business of connecting people who are surplus with people who are in deficit, they make a margin. And that's how they make money. Right? So if banks have more and more money, they will lend more and more.
again, they will take risk.
They will take risk, but the problem is there is just not enough money in the hands of consumers to spend on whatever is being produced. So banks are lending, the economy is producing, but the buyers are not there because they don't have enough money in their hands. They are more interested in saving. So there is a balance that you must achieve. And a balance at which there is enough in incentive to save, but also leaves enough money with the consumers to consume. And that's very, very difficult to do right. We have to, so one of the real challenges of the RBI governor, which nobody talks about, is to get this right. Because if he raises interest rates too much, there is just not enough money in the economy to consume. And if he reduces interest rates too much, there is just not enough incentive to save. And if there is no money in the bank, what happens?
Again, they cannot loan. So
They also get they also get constrained in making this money available to the economy to lend. So everybody seems to be consuming, nobody seems to be saving. Okay, so it's a very, very delicate balance, and there is no one rate. Again, if we get to this rate, we are good. Unfortunately, nobody knows what that rate is. Okay? But theoretically, this is how it works, yes.
Maybe not very related, but how does RBI decide how much money they have to print?
They don't print too much of money. First. The only country whose biggest product that they make is money is US. The biggest production in US is dollars. They print money and sell. Nobody else does this. So the demand for dollars is so much that they have made it as a product. How did that happen? It's a long story. So RBI doesn't print too much money. Most government and most central banks are very reluctant to get more liquid money in the market by printing. They circulate the money.
Basically, it's not much interesting how much physical notes are in the market. The question basically was how are the RBI governor are they decided to know probably last time we this much of billions of rupees required and now this year probably this will be more because inflation is going high and some more money will be used.
Inflation doesn't mean we need more money. Inflation doesn't mean the country needs more money. Inflation simply means that maybe some amount of savings have to be consumed because the prices are going up. You will not be left with so much of saving. Because of your total earnings, you are forced to consume more, because though you could be consuming the same quantity, the value of that quantity has gone up, and so you will have less money to save. So inflation becomes a problem, not for rich people like you, because we continue to go and enjoy ourselves every week. Inflation doesn't really matter. I mean, I don't see anybody who says petrol has become 100 rupees, so let me not take out my car. I mean, we've stopped even thinking about what the price of petrol is.
It is all about to do with purchasing power.
No, but it does matter to people who in India, there are a large number of those who have retired and survive on pensions and savings on fixed deposits. To them, inflation really hurts.
Personal finance, consumer debt should be going to impact the total society. That is it.
Of course.
Therefore, from that point of view, your question, how much should be the real interest rate? Should be little more than the inflation, though they are related.
But you are assuming that we have only one way of saving money. Fixed deposit. So we will look at an example as to make ourselves better off before we get there. Right? So we will look at it. Good that you raise this point, so we will look at it. Okay. So business is all about creating value. The value could be translated into profits or translated to profits at this point of time. Finance is all about the process of earning and managing money. And we need to, when we look at and we think of money, there are two concepts. First one is time value and the second is risk. And whenever we talk and think of money, we must be clear of these two fundamental requirements of money. What is the risk and what is the time value? And it's time value that has taken us all over the world, because as time value of money increases, there are certain different behaviors, and as time value of money decreases, there are completely different behaviors. Technically, risk is a deviation from your expectation to what really happens. For example, if a particular product needs to have this particular specification, if your deviation is positive, it is an unusable product. Right? So the deviations both up and down are risk. So what is the risk in my manufacturing process? That I will produce bottles which are bigger than the specified deviation. There is a risk. Because in both sides they are unusable. Right? It is not that bigger bottles are acceptable. Right? So risk is the deviation between what is the expectation and what are we really, what is the probability that what we get is different from our expectation. In finance, all positives are nice, so we look at only negative as risk.
Yeah, that's what
But in finance, when we look at risk, we look at negative deviation as risk. Right? Because positive deviations over our expectations are all nice, because time value of money we believe is higher, the better. Right? So in finance, when we say risk, we are primarily concerned about negative deviations. Yes.
Over here, we were talking about all this is being the reason is okay. I understand about RB and banks, repo rate, reverse repo, but how the money comes in about
With public finance, let's not talk about it too much, because we will get everybody into a traction where they will find it very difficult to get out. Okay, but very quickly, RBI is more concerned about inflation than anything else at this point. So their entire mechanism of deciding interest rates, which is basically the interest rate at which banks can borrow from RBI and at which banks can lend to RBI, is decided by RBI, because that determines all other rates in the economy. So the RBI is trying to control inflation by managing this rate. Right? What they are called, don't worry. They are called repo, they are called reverse repo, it doesn't really matter. Right? So RBI manages interest rates in the economy by deciding two rates. First rate is the rate at which banks can borrow money from RBI, and the second rate is the rate at which banks can lend money to RBI. Because every other rate is decided as a plus over this rate. But that need not be the only objective of the central bank. Central bank should also be concerned about what is the GDP growth. Because inflation on its own doesn't make any sense. I mean, why are we not okay with inflation if the economy is growing at 10%? We're not okay with it. So inflation per se has no meaning as long as we can generate growth. It's only in the case of low growth, high inflation that we should really worry about. But if you have inflation with high growth, I think we're quite okay. Because at this point of time, the country probably requires growth more than inflation money. And so again, like CEOs of organizations, you can't take one stand saying that I need only profitability, value, and top line growth is not concern of mine. Or you can say I only need top line growth, profitability is not my concern. I need profitability in short term, long term is not my concern. And let me only worry about long term, short term is not my concern. We can't take any of these as the only driver. Similarly, RBI should not take one as the only driver for its decision making. It really depends upon where we are as a country. And that's why there's a, if you really look very deeply, that's the reason why the government and RBI government did not get it. Yes.
You said US is printing more dollars, right? Recently Zimbabwe also their dollar is crashed, right? So what is that difference, what US doing and what Zimbabwe doing? Yeah, leading question, I will ask the same question.
There is just too much demand for US dollars, there is just no demand for Zimbabwe. So if you produce 1 million of this bottle, doesn't mean it will get sold. I mean, there's just nobody wanting to buy this bottle. But if this bottle happens to be US dollars, then everybody is quite interested. That's the reality of the life.
When does the money lose value?
When there's too much of it around.
Because US dollar has not.
There is just too much of it around and there is no demand for it.
So how much US prints a dollar of $100. So what is the rate at which let's say someone buys it? Because it's
It depends upon how much do I am willing to pay for and how much are you willing to pay for.
And why is this unique thing with US dollar? Is it because all the countries transact in US dollar?
Exactly. Because the world trade is in US dollar. And as the world trade keeps increasing year on year, the demand for dollar keeps increasing. And unless somebody, which Euro tried, China is trying to reprice their trade in a currency other than dollar, which they haven't succeeded yet, this is not going to end.
so let's say US prints some $1 billion, which for them it may cost 1 million.
Cost, forget the cost, there is no cost of printing. The cost of 10 rupees that we print is not more than a rupee. Because if it were, people will hoard it because it is more valuable than what is printed on it, right? So the aim is that this paper should not cost what it is written on. I mean, what is written on the paper. So there is no cost. And that is why you see more. So earlier we used to have the coins, silver coin. The cost of silver became more than the value which was printed on it. People are holding coins for silver not because of what was printed on it. So obviously all central banks make sure that the cost of printing is significantly less than the value which is printed on it. So that you don't hoard it for its intrinsic value. So cost of printing 1 billion is free. You can just print. Because somebody wants it.
That's what they did in 2008.
They have been doing since 2008, they haven't stopped. Since 2008, that's all they have been doing, printing dollars.
Isn't that adversely affecting the inflation? As in increasing it?
It is not. Because the demand hasn't picked up. And unfortunately, the whole world hasn't come out of the recession which they originated in 2008. And we are still struggling to get out of it in 2016. We have lived through the last 8 years. We haven't come out of this problem as a world economy. And if you look around, unfortunately, if you look around, bad news, things don't seem to be picking up anywhere else. except maybe a little in US. So we have lived through probably one of the worst 8 years in the history of, since people talk about it as the worst depression since the Big Depression in 1930 to 1942. Yes. Any other question?
Rally, it's a kind of layman question. So, like, if we ignore rupees and transact dollars, in India, so what's the harm and the possibilities going on? Is it something?
What's the harm? Where will you get dollars from?
Why you want to do it first of all?
No, but where will you get dollars from first?
So you can get it from US.
That means you have to go to US and say, give me more dollars. What will they do? They say, okay, pay 100 rupees now. Now 67 becomes 100. Why? Because you want some more dollars. That's how dollars have been going up, because more and more people are saying, I need dollars. But only there is one supplier of dollars, which is US. That's why the value of dollar keeps going up, because money has value of time. The circulation, even if nothing happens, the value of the same money will increase by the value of the time. Right? So the trade usually keeps going up at a particular rate every year. The global trade. The value of global trade is increasing every year. It increases by big numbers when more economies are doing well. It increases by a small number when economies are not doing so well, but it is increasing. And as more and more trade is denominated in dollars, the demand for dollar keeps going up. Okay? Yes.
India, when we print money, we keep equal gold or some percentage of the gold and then in par with the return. US isn't doing like that.
We also don't do it. We used to do it. Nobody does it.
But when we print more money, the valuable gets down, right?
Not necessarily. There is a demand for your money. So if Bangladesh wants Indian rupees, if Nepal wants Indian rupees, you are quite alright. And if you can improve your trade with them, they want more of your currency. They're quite alright. If you are growing at 10%, 11%, the whole world is growing at 2%, obviously you are exporting more. Then you are quite alright. Because the value of your goods are going up in the world economy.
So trade is one of the important factors for
Of course, the trade deficit is an important factor in deciding what the currency values are. You need more of them or they need more of you.
So more you exporting, the current account deficit will be less and then
Yeah. Okay, so we understood what is time and what is risk. Uncertainty is nothing but risk. Anything of value can be used, anything can be valued using a framework. Anything. Anything which has whether it's a physical asset or whether it's an intangible asset, we can use a financial model to value it. And that's what valuation is all about. Right? So when you value companies, when you value an asset, you need a financial model to put a value to it. And finance helps you do that quite well. Okay.
So will you be talking valuation?
Yeah, of course we do. But we do it in round 2. And it is the language of business, because otherwise we can't compare businesses across time and across each other. So if we have to compare how we are doing vis-a-vis how we were doing earlier, or if we have to compare how we are doing as compared to somebody else in the same business, we need a common denominator to compare. And that common denominator is finance. That's why we need to understand what it all means. More importantly, if you are good and you get good at finance and improve your financial acumen, it does change the way we think. Because we let go a unidimensional approach to our thought process. And since finance is an assimilation of a lot of other functions, we are forced to think about other implications, which may have a financial So if you're a salesperson, you have to think of customer profitably. You can no longer think of sales as how many have we sold. You can no longer think of sales as order book, customer hasn't paid. These things start concerning you. You don't think of sales as invoice raised, goods not delivered. And all of this you know what is the implication as far as business is concerned. Earlier, since you were oblivious about the connection, sales guys said, if I book order, I'm performing. It is no longer enough. So it's no longer enough if you book orders. Can I take one? It is no longer enough if we book orders. We are concerned about having booked order. It has been delivered. We are concerned about delivered. What is my credit terms? We are concerned about credit terms as the customer paid. We are concerned about what happens if the customer doesn't pay. How does it all impact my organization? So we are no longer unidimensional in our functional approach. We have to consider many other implications and it changes the way we think. And this is the most important contribution of finance to the way we operate. So we consider what the risk is all about. And so risk is an important part of understanding money and understanding finance. In finance, we also look at what is called return on investment. Return on investment is very simple. Income or gain divided by investment amount. It is expressed as a percentage. So if we invest 100 rupees, we get 110 rupees at the end of 1 year. Our return on investment is 10 by 100, which is 10%. So that's called return on investment. So since we are looking at thinking of finance as part of corporate finance, we need to understand the structure of organizations. How do companies get into existence? Because if we don't understand it well, we wouldn't be able to understand finance properly. So all companies are originated by what are called shareholders or promoters. Otherwise, the company cannot get into existence. Right? So usually, not usually, all companies have a few people who are classified as promoters. They could do whatever they want to do in their individual capacity, but they make a decision which says it is probably easier and more efficient to do this work under the entity of a company. And so they say, okay, let's not do this in our individual capacity, let's go and create a company. And when they go and create a company, in India you are required to have at least 2 promoters. So 2 of them get together and say, okay, we want to do this business, let's go and incorporate a company. Both of us will become shareholders of this company and this company is incorporated as a private limited company. Private limited companies can be incorporated with 2 people. So what are the benefits of operating a company rather than doing this in individual name?
The risk is limited to
Risk of what?
if at all you run into losses, so it's only the company, not your individual finances.
So if you have losses, what will happen?
I mean, you're not liable, limited liability.
So there are many other options here. constitutional entity called partnership. So two of you can form a partnership and you can do exactly the same thing. What is the advantage of being in a partnership?
You're balancing the liabilities. Everything has been balanced. Risk as well as profitability. Everything.
It's easier to incorporate and do compliances of a partnership to statutory authorities. And so lots of people believe it's far easier and less cumbersome to be in a partnership than move into a sole proprietorship. Easiest in terms of incorporation, easiest in terms of operation and compliance. People move from sole proprietorship to any other method because the credibility in the market is the least for a sole proprietorship. So as it becomes bigger and bigger, the customers don't like dealing with large sole proprietorship. But it is quite okay if the business is quite small. For example, all the retail outlets that you see in your localities, most of them who are not branded are also proprietorships. They are able to do their business in their individual name. But your credibility is not so much. So if he goes to another locality and sets up the shop, people won't recognize him. People may think they don't know who this gentleman is. And so you find it difficult to scale if you are a sole proprietorship. So you move to the first level, or you could move to the first level, which is a partnership. Easier to operate and easier to supply. What is the risk? What are the demerits of the partnership?
Because I will pass on the person in the ratio of the partnership.
So there are two disadvantages. One, partnership cannot sustain without the two partners or the three partners. So if the partners change, the partnership comes to an end. You need to create a new partnership if you have to change the partners. So two of you started a business. After some time, he doesn't want to continue and you want to get a new partner. All the partners.
No, they thought
There is no complete. The partnership gets dissolved, the profit gets shared. You need to create a new partnership with him and start business. Everything is new. But there are some businesses in India which is required to be in partnership, and the most common of them is chartered accountants. Can't be a chartered accountant if you are not in a partnership, because the liabilities of partnerships are completely transferable to the partner.
Talk about incorporation. What do you mean by incorporation?
So in partnership, the liabilities are completely transferable to the partners with the same proportion of their contribution. Right? And the liability could be financial or could be non-financial. What are non-financial liabilities? Any idea?
Legal obligations.
Legal obligations, all non-financial obligations which arise out of contracts, which arise out of your performance, are completely transferable to the partners. And that's why auditing firms have to be partnerships. Law firms have to be partnerships. Because if you give an opinion, or if you sign a balance sheet or a profit and loss account, if there are negligence in discharging your duty, the negligence can be, the partners can be held responsible individually for the negligence.
So in this case, the sole partnership Let's
solely
say-
partnership.
So let's say there's a lawyer who does this job for you, and you end up in a legal trouble. So that he was sole proprietorship, and he's still liable.
So in sole proprietorship and in partnership, the owners are completely liable.
So both there.
The liabilities are completely devolves on the owners. In the sole proprietorship, the sole proprietor, in the partnership, the partners.
Can companies get into partnership? What's joint venture?
Is it to support when the one partner is not there in the firm? Why we have that mandate?
We have a mandate because you are in a you have a responsibility of deliverable which is statutory requirement. And if you have statutory requirements as a deliverables, you can't hide behind a corporate entity. You have to take personal liability of your performance. In a private limited company and a limited company, the shareholders can hide behind a limited liability entity called company. You can't sue the shareholders. You can't hold the shareholders responsible for negligence of this company. And as you grow in your business and as owners get separated because of the size, they prefer to be in a entity like company and not prefer to be in an entity like a partnership or a sole proprietorship.
In that case, how come Vijay Mallya is being prosecuted as a deviation?
As a criminal offense. So they are trying to make the whole procedure move from a civil offense to a criminal offense. The criminal offenses can be proved if you can prove, or you can go to a criminal offense if you can prove that he was in full know of what was going to happen and he was negligent deliberately with an intent to fraud. If you cannot prove this, it cannot be a criminal offense. And if it's not a criminal offense, you can't sue him. The liabilities are completely devolvable on the owners, in this case the partners. Right?
When shareholder is a director, is he not held for the name?
So we'll come there.
Why do we put people to their partnership?
If it's not a partnership and there is one owner, it is called sole proprietorship. So if there is only one owner, it's a sole proprietorship. If you want to induct somebody else into business, you have two options. You can incorporate a partnership or you can incorporate a private limited. If you don't want another partner, either in terms of partnership or as shareholders, you remain a sole proprietorship.
Like CA and lawyer,
No, it's not mandatory. You can be a sole proprietor. The restriction for CAs and lawyers are, which is again statutorily, the restriction in how many non-partners you can have with every partner. So if I have a sole proprietorship, the number of people who are engaged in the business with me cannot exceed a particular number. And so if I have to grow my business because the business is growing and I can't handle with this small team, I am forced to have another partner because only then I can add so many more people.
In that case, it is a scale problem, right?
It is a scale problem.
But sometimes you told you need to have a partner in CA and lawyer.
You cannot be a non-partner in CA and lawyer profession. You can't move the scale by going into a company's club.
So how about
any operating in CA or partnership? They cannot be what is they file individual or company?
They only file, they don't give you advice.
No, but they do give advice.
They give?
They give. Because if it is readropping from them and we drop Does it have signature by? And it says there.
Are you auditing your accounts?
No, they are not auditing, but it is what credit there is. There is a calculation. Then filing on our behalf.
So who is responsible as far as that is concerned? They are filing on your behalf, they are not filing it themselves. They don't take any responsibility for things going wrong.
Okay, for income tax, we have certain open areas which has been exposed and tax pattern is using directly.
Yeah, so in personal income tax, you cannot say the auditor filed my account.
No, I'm coming to that. Even if I have to file, I don't have to go to income tax website. I can go to tax pattern website and I'll be filing over there.
No problem.
And income tax website, if I go, it is reflected, it's being filed to their tax pattern.
No problem. The liability is yours. If anything goes wrong in your filing, you as individual is liable for wrong filing.
That's what they do.
They asked her to check also.
Yeah, of course.
If
They are not
you
taking any liability.
filing,
They are just helping you file this with income tax department.
No, I'm coming to say this. I'm not talking about liability. I'm talking about why they are operating as company.
Because they are not auditing, they are not taking any liability.
That's an IT processing company.
That's a processing company. For example, I don't need an auditor to file income tax. There is no statutory requirement as personal income tax filing to be audited. If you know how to file it, you can file it yourself. It is perfectly acceptable. In a corporate entity, you cannot file your income tax unless it is audited. So there is an external authority or a person who is supposed to audit, and he takes the responsibility arising out of audit. He is in some way certifying that these numbers are true. In your case, the person is not certifying at all.
No, but the companies, people who do auditing are also from corporate, not the pages. They will say they do auditing for certain companies. The still it's operating in a company.
KPMG is a partnership.
So all from law firms?
All audit firms like KPMG, Deloitte, they will audit that part of business is a partnership. They incidentally have a consulting company office.
So that is another entity.
That's a separate entity which does consult. Audit is in partnership.
So in partnership we have like different types, right? The civil partners,
So don't get complicated. All this.
shareholders are not allowed.
So we'll come. So we understand, as long as you understand why we do a company, right? So this is why the shareholders will form a company, and first they will form a private limited company usually, because the number of shareholders are limited. You can convert yourself into a public limited company on two conditions. Actually only one condition. Two. One, the number of shareholders go beyond 200. If I remember right, the number now is 200. Earlier it used to be 50. If the number of shareholders become more than 200, you are classified as a public company. Or an existing public company incorporates a new company, it can be a public company. Otherwise it will be classified as a private company. If an existing new public company incorporates a new company, the new company also can be a public limited company. Otherwise it will be classified as a private shareholder. So you incorporate this company and you become shareholders, right?
So partnerships, what they call actually? Will they also be called privately?
They are called partnerships.
This partnership.
So there is sole proprietorship, partnership, private limited company, limited.
Okay.
All of them are to be registered, and that's why it's called incorporated.
There is one more thing called LLP, right? So limited liability partnership.
So one of the variants that has come around is called a limited liability partnership, which is saying you can derive some benefits of being a corporate, like a public, like a private company, by reducing or limiting your liability. So you have the benefits of operating with lower compliance as a partnership, but you have limited liability, and they are called LLPs. So LLPs are now allowed in certain businesses.
The brownfield concept, which is of Make in India, where 7 companies club together and form an association and they expand and they allow other companies or startups to join up, then it will be like LLP or a partnership or how it
You
is.
can choose to incorporate whichever entity you think is relevant for you.
Okay.
There is a third entity which nobody or very few people talk about, but it is recognized legally, is an entity which is called Association of Persons.
Yeah. That's what.
It's an entity legally.
Legal.
Right? You can create an entity which is called Association of Person and register it and operate under it. The difference is that none of their businesses are merged. They just operate for certain particular specific work. Right? Many of the construction work that you see around, where you can see an Indian company with a foreign company. Lots of road, if you really notice, lot of road construction is in the form of AOP, where because of the tender requirements of NHAI, the Indian company doesn't qualify. And so they were allowed AOP, where they could enter into an AOP agreement with a foreign entity, both put together met the tender requirement. But they are only here for that specific work. Once the work is over, they go their separate ways. Right? So AOP is allowed in legal terms, but don't get yourself confused with so many variants. Our purpose is to understand this because this is the most applicable structure that you will see. And so you must understand some of the nuances arising out of this structure.
Societies and trust, they don't.
So another entities are societies and trust, where certain businesses can only be undertaken in societies and trust. Typically religious business, education business in India can only be under society and trust.
Not health.
Not
Health?
no, health can be in corporate structure. So this is how a company gets incorporated. But what happens subsequently is that these who are the shareholders, they incorporate a company. They may first find it quite convenient to operate the company, but then they say, okay, we have other businesses, another interest to pursue, and so they introduce an intermediary structure which is called board of directors. Right? So they separate out from, they distance themselves from the operations of the company by incorporating a structure which is called board of directors. The shareholders can be also directors. They can choose not to be directors. It is technically possible. Right? So you can be also a part of board of directors. And usually you will invite some other people who are not shareholders but should be on the board of directors. And then you will hire professionals at the company level who will run the company on a day-to-day basis. Right?
These board of directors are not hired. They will hire them or they will.
Who will hire them?
Normally, chairman, company owner,
hired in the sense they will be paid for doing their role.
There are many structures. There is no fixed structures for this. As there is no fixed structure for this. Right? We are assuming that everybody whose company, who is running in the company or working in the company is hired. That is, you pay some compensation to them to do this responsibility. Similarly, they will be paid some compensation to be on the board of directors. But the point to managers of the company, but they are appointed by the shareholders. So the structure works is that first I am a shareholder, then I appoint the board of directors, and the board of directors appoint the managers in the company.
I take a typical example. I just want to know, KV Kamath is not at all a shareholder and he is joined as a board of director for Infosys and he is being recommended by Narayan Murthy. So in this case, how it is applicable?
Who do you think appointed him?
Shareholder.
Shareholders in?
They are also, he is also shareholder in Infosys.
May have become later, but when he got appointed, he was not a shareholder.
Yeah.
So who appointed him?
Shareholder. BOD, I guess.
No, he was appointed by the shareholders. Right? So let's take this example. Both of you are 50% holder of this company. Now you want to create the board of directors. You want him to come as board of directors. How will you get him as board of directors?
Some shares.
You want him to be a part of board of directors. You hold 50% of the company, he holds 50% of the company. How can he be appointed as the board of directors? Both of you have to agree that he has to be in the board. What if he does not agree? He cannot be appointed because both of you have equal vote on his appointment. Because both of you hold 50-50. You can't appoint him without his approval. Suppose you had 90%, he had 10%. You wanted to appoint him. You can still appoint him because he can only vote against you by 10%. 90% of appointment is in your hand. He cannot stop any appointments in board of directors because you are the largest shareholder and you can vote your people onto the board. So board of directors are appointed as a resolution in what is called annual general meeting. And in annual general meeting, the shareholders vote yes or no for board appointments. And those who control the shareholding appoint their representatives.
Very large organizations, let's say, how they develop, how this function is.
So he holds 90%, all of you hold the balance 10%. You want to appoint me. Exactly. That's how it works. So all board members will be the people that he wants to appoint. You may hold some shares. Can't do anything about it. Yeah, then make some money outside. You hope that he is a great guy that you would want to hold shares in his company.
The thing is, if he holds 90% of the shares, then it might as well be a sole proprietorship.
No.
That means that guy has got into the company only to hide behind the label.
Not necessarily.
Still a partnership.
Not necessarily. You are allowed to be a company with significant stake. And to prevent it now, there are some regulations of listed companies. But if you are unlisted, you can still be 90% and 10% the rest.
That still be a company.
Because the other people who are holding 10% believe in the great guy to invest money in.
But he doesn't have a personal liability.
It doesn't have, neither do you. Neither do you. But you believe it's worthwhile associated with him, even for a small stake, because he can make a lot of money for you.
What is the difference?
So the economic reasons should be clear to the people who have low shareholding. Otherwise, don't get it. Because you can't really control anything without his approval. And that's the realization I want you to have when you look at and think of companies and how shareholding affect what these people do. So, board is controlled by the guys who control shareholding, and these guys are appointed by board of directors. So, ultimately, the large shareholders control who operates the company by controlling the board of directors. The important thing to note is this exists, this gets incorporated and exists for only one single purpose. And what is that purpose?
Profit for the
For whom? Shareholders. Otherwise, this does not have a business to exist. The companies exist and get incorporated only to meet the requirements of the shareholders. It doesn't matter who is here. His whole and only reason why he exists is to do what the shareholders intend him to do. Otherwise, this wouldn't be incorporated in the first place. This is a vehicle of the shareholders to meet their requirements. It cannot exist for itself.
Why is the board of directors needed? When is it typically needed?
Board of directors are needed because the shareholders may not be as close to working on the company because they may have many other interests. And so as a matter of control, and since you could be many other people, this allows a far greater supervision over the operations of the company as what the shareholders may provide.
But if the board of directors are not actual employees of the company,
they may not be.
What's in it for them? I mean, how do you expect commitment from them?
That is for the shareholders to figure out. I mean, as a shareholder, if I want to appoint you as the board of directors, I have to give some logic and reason to you.
Many are appointed as right?
Because they want to be appointed as audit. They feel it's a matter of pride to be on the board of Infosys. Because they derive many of the value by saying I am the director of Infosys. So it's between the two of them to figure out why would you be on the board of this company? If I don't see any value, I would say no. Then I have to provide you some value.
So in terms of the technicalities, what is the responsibilities and liabilities board of directors have?
Now in the new company act which got passed in 2013, there are certain liabilities which can be put on the board of directors for non-compliance, which did not exist in the earlier act. It still hasn't got to shareholders. Right? But if you are a director on a company, you are certifying certain acts of the company. And if those acts are not done, you could be held liable. And they are very clearly specified now in the Act. And the Act is no longer, and the liability is no longer limited to financial penalties. They have extended it to imprisonment. So you have to be really careful which company's board you are on.
No, but that will be directed by the shareholders. Shareholder may be.
If I don't think you are a very good person and everything about your company is ethical, I wouldn't get on your board of directors. So as an independent director, since I have a lot of responsibility for which I could be held liable, people have become very choosy to associate with certain shareholders. So if you remember and you read the news article, the CFO of Kingfisher is imprisoned.
Yeah.
For check bounce. Such liabilities have now started to be implemented. You can't say you can only file a case against the company.
So this is also the CFO was part of the company box.
But he is also a director.
He was also a director.
The check bounce is a separate case, but I'm saying if you are a director and certain things in the companies are found to be non-legal, you could be held responsible. So earlier this whole comfort that you had saying that you can only file case against the company and not me, a lot of it has gone away in the new act. Some of the office bearers and the directors can be held responsible individually for non-compliance of certain activities in the company.
So having board of directors, shareholders can still have a large say, control a lot of things, right?
Shareholders control everything through board of directors, including who is the CEO. The board of directors can fire the CEO.
So since the liability has gone up for the board of directors, do we think the relation between the shareholder and the board of directors, they can't have followers on the board of directors? Shareholders.
They will not appoint anybody on whom they can't call shots on.
That's true.
That's very clear about it. You can't get on to the board of my company unless I agree. You will be the greatest guy on earth. I have to agree as shareholder.
Employees of the company also get any shareholders.
So as a part of the incentive and growth strategies,
We got ESOPs and all.
that's here. You can be a shareholder by holding shares, but as a part of the growth strategy and career advancement, people are offered a seat on the board as a part of their career growth. So you could be a CEO who is not a board of directors. He is a CEO, but he is not on the board of directors.
Yeah.
It's possible.
But they're getting to us. Can they become the major shareholder?
If you can acquire shares, you can. If it's available, somebody is selling, you can buy, so you can.
The CEO can go and buy major stake.
From where?
If somebody is.
Yeah, so if he is selling part of his 90% and you are the CEO and he sells it to you, of course he will become. But the existing shareholders have to sell.
Again, they have some legal or CEO appointment also, they will do some shares.
That's different. By becoming shareholders, you can't control this.
That's
By having some ESOPs in Infosys, you cannot appoint me as the board of director. Because you get voted out by the other guys who are controlling more shareholding in the company. You may be a shareholder. You can attend the AGM.
So there are companies whom we have seen grown big.
Example.
The founders were all CEOs and CEOs all the same. And they had major.
You can be shareholder. You can be on the board. You can appoint yourself as the CEO. It's possible. Why? You control the board by appointing the board, and the board appointed you as the CEO.
Can we have some examples?
Infosys.
No, but they don't have more than 20% of this.
You don't have more than 8%. There are only there 3% holding.
They had more than 60 years.
But remember and understand, Narayan Murthy at 3% got kicked out as CEO of Infosys because finally the shareholder said you are not performing. Right? He went, came back, was forced to go. Because the other shareholder said you are underperforming. Please find a better CEO. So it is possible, and we have seen it. Only thing that we don't put two and two together as to why did that happen. It happened because till the time he would control the board, he was controlling who was running the company. At some point of time, the other shareholders controlled the board and said, sorry, you are not delivering us the returns. Let's find a new CEO. Please be the CEO, the board of director and the shareholder. And so they got.
and then
And this was Sikka.
no, that is
Sikka happened after Mr. Narayan Murthy left.
but he was not taking the complete CEO role, right?
Oh.
Narayan Murthy.
In the second term, of course he was.
CEO.
He came back after going public saying that I am retiring from day to day.
That's
work.
true.
Why did he come back?
Just to uplift and Sony all business, right?
Okay, doesn't matter. But the point that I am trying to make is, structure works top down, not this way. That's the point I'm trying to make. That it always works top down, and this has only one requirement. It has to meet the requirements of shareholders. That's it. Otherwise, it has no business to be in business.
Chairperson now will be part of the
Chairman is of the board. When you see the word board of director, chairman, they are all here.
Is there any regulation minimum number of directors?
There are some requirements. But don't get caught up in those because they're not really relevant for you at this point of time in understanding finance. They are more to understand how to operate a company structure. But this is important for you to understand finance because all finance that we will look at is from the perspective of the company. We're not going to look at anything from the perspective of the shareholders, except whatever is the relationship or the transaction which the company has with its shareholders and other stakeholders. But we are looking at finance from the perspective of the company. Okay, let's take a break.